Today, we will be looking at how the story of GTA 5 would have played out if Trevor died during the prologue mission and it all went like Michael and Dave planned it. How would this affect Michael and his family, or Franklin, or Lester, or even Brad? We start, of course, in the game's prologue right after the crew, consisting of Michael, Trevor, and Brad, gets clipped by a train. Everyone gets out of the car, and they start heading towards the chopper, quote unquote. By the way, if you want me to make a video on that topic, whether I think that helicopter was actually there in the prologue, comment down below and I'll see what I can do about it. Dave is around the corner, and in this version, Brad would not get shot because he would not step in front of Trevor, allowing Dave to get a perfect shot on Trevor. Brad and Michael would split, running in completely different directions. Brad runs from the authorities and Michael runs to his family to ensure that they're prepared for a new life in Los Santos. At the same time, as Michael is watching, quote-unquote, his funeral, which would, as we know, in this reality be Trevor's funeral, Brad would, after a few days, be caught by Dave. I say this specifically since the whole deal with Michael is an off-the-books deal with only Michael and Dave involved, and I imagine that only Dave and a couple of people that he paid to help with the job would know about the whole thing. So Dave and a few of his guys would capture Brad and then sell the story that they killed Michael Townley. Or Dave did, rather. It also worked in Dave's favor that Brad had no idea whether Michael was dead or alive. And if he did, I imagine he would probably rat Michael out, as the two were never really close. Or I mean, he couldn't really rat him out, but he could give them a description of him or some information that would help out, which would of course leave Dave and Michael in deep shit. However, with Brad in custody and the public thinking that Michael Townley is dead, this means that Michael would finally be able to retire in peace. However, Dave had some more shit on his plate to take care of, as he was scared that sooner or later someone would start asking about the third member of Michael Townley's crew. Dave would have to act fast and fake some documents stating that Trevor was in some prison in the middle of fucking nowhere. And indeed, no one would ask any questions, and it would seem that Dave was in the clear. At least for now. We pick up with Michael and Franklin, and let me clarify one thing before we continue. Everything with these two would happen exactly the same as it happened in the original game. So Michael would still pull down Madrazo's house, and he would still be forced to go back to his old ways of robbing. And the jewel store heist would of course also happen, and Michael's quote would not have that much of an impact like it did in the original, because of course Trevor is dead. And things would be going relatively smooth right until Steve starts digging through Dave's shit and finds out the truth, because Steve has been suspicious of Dave because the only remarkable thing about his entire career was killing Michael Townley. Steve would figure it all out and start blackmailing Dave, Michael, and by extension Franklin because he was helping Michael, after Michael filled him in on everything that happened at the end of the mission Dead Man Walking. And to simply put it, if they did not do what Steve wanted, Dave would likely go to prison for a long time, and Michael would either do life in prison or maybe even get the death penalty. It is also worth mentioning that the Merryweather heist would never happen, nor would we ever meet Ron, Wade, or Floyd, because of course Trevor is dead. Michael and Franklin would struggle a lot more in this reality without Trevor. Sure, Steve could get some no-name psycho to get the info out of Mr. K, and I imagine that the Blitzplay mission in particular would feature Michael and Franklin just barely making it out of there alive. Fast forward a little bit to the mission that in the original features Michael and Trevor do a job for Martin Madrazo, and unlike the original, the thing here would go more smoothly as it was Franklin here, not Trevor, and after a little bit of negotiations from Michael, the duo would be fairly paid, and that would be the end of that, and Michael would of course never have to go on the run and look over his shoulder constantly for Madrazo's goons. This leaves one less problem for the Michael and Franklin duo. Michael's family situation would still involve them leaving him, however this time because they realized that he got back to his old ways of robbing and they would simply just not want to be around that anymore, so they would just leave him. The Devin Weston part, as well as the Solomon Richards parts of the game, would play out like in the original, but what would change really is the bury the hatchet and fresh meat missions. Or rather, they would never happen, for obvious reasons. And if you made it this far into the video, and if you're enjoying my content and this video overall, drop a subscribe to the YouTube channel. We are currently on our way to get to 1,500 subscribers by the end of this year. And now with the crew consisting of Michael, Franklin, Lester, and Lamar, who is the newest addition, after he proved himself to be a skilled gunman on the Polito score. They would start planning their raid on the biggest bank on the West Coast. During this time, Michael would struggle a lot with his inner demons, as all of this made him remember Trevor, whose memory he has been repressing for the last 9 years, but he could not do it anymore, as he was working towards his original dream that he had with Trevor all the way back in the day. This would lead to Michael feeling guilty every day, something he would have to live with for the rest of his life. The UD heist has to temporarily be put on hold, as our boy Steve Haynes, wants to rob the FIB building. Michael and Franklin would use this to their advantage, and during the robbery itself, they would delete everything that Steve was blackmailing Michael with. The wrap-up mission would play out a little bit differently, as you can imagine. In this version, Lester would ask Franklin to watch over the meat, and as soon as the shit show starts, Franklin would be right there to back Michael up, and the duo would meet up afterwards. Everything with Devin Weston would play out the same way like it did in the original, with Molly still dying, and Devin being a salty piece of shit and going after Michael's family, who is by this time already back at his house, with the crew on a timer because of the price on Michael's head. From Devin, they would have to act fast. After successfully saving Lamar and robbing the Union Depository with his help, as rough as it was without Trevor, they would still somehow pull it off. And even though they are at this point practically rolling in the money, Michael would become increasingly more paranoid, and he would reach out to Lester, Franklin, and Lamar, asking them to help him out with the loose ends, which in this reality consists of Devin Weston, Steve Haynes, and Stretch, leaving them with a bit less work than in the original, as the Chinese triad would never be a problem, with Franklin going after Steve Haynes, Michael after Stretch, and Lamar after Devin Weston, who I think is worth mentioning that Lamar also has some beef with at this point, because he did scam him just like in the original when they were doing the whole stolen cars gig for him. One by one, they would take out all of their targets, and just like in the original, the trio with Lamar instead of Trevor would get rid of Devin Weston. And because of everything that they did beforehand, including the UD heist, killing Steve Haynes, and everything else, even though nobody really knew what they looked like, they would still have to live out the rest of their lives, sort of keeping a low profile for the most part, with Michael basically deciding to dedicate himself and focus on his family, as well as working at Majestic Studios. Franklin would a few years later, just like in the original, become a wealthy businessman and a family man himself, but I cannot imagine him going to Michael for parenting advice. Lester would of course work on several jobs with the GTA Online protagonist, and Lamar would stick around Chamberlain Hills for a few more years before eventually opening up LD Organics. And as far as Brad goes, he would likely spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes and probably would never see the light of day, and therefore he would probably never find out what happened to Michael. The extent of his knowledge would probably be that he would know that Trevor is dead because he saw him get shot, but that's about it. Because if you remember what I said in the beginning, him and Michael took off running in completely different directions. Therefore, there would be no chance of Brad ever finding out what happened to Michael, let alone finding out everything that happened afterwards. And that concludes this GTA 5 What If video. If you liked it, leave a like on the YouTube video, it helps out a ton. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Until the next video stream, thank you so much for watching, and bye bye.